And I've spent the last 8 years in mining now. And as I've gone deeper, I didn't know everything I know 8 years ago, of course, but I've realized that until you really understand mining, you really don't understand Bitcoin. Like, the heart and soul of Bitcoin exists right there. The only way to vote for those things is to control a block template. And so whether you're for it or against it, I actually don't care. In the context of this conversation, I don't care. What I care about is people voting. It's kind of the same as, if you're a citizen of a country and you choose not to vote, you're not participating in the process. So, and Bitcoin is dependent on people participating. The rabbits are typically individuals, typically running 1 or 2 units. It could be something tiny like a BitX with 1 terahash per second of hash power. Individually, whether that participant is in the network or not is not relevant, but collectively they can be very powerful. If you have a farmer with a big field of lettuce, let's say, one rabbit is in the field eating a little bit of lettuce, it's no big deal. But if you have an infestation of rabbits, they can eat the whole freaking crop.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button, which is the easiest way you could show your support for the show and help it grow, as well as making sure you don't miss out any of the future episodes. Also, a big shout out to StampSeed for sponsoring the show. Check out stampseed.com for more information. And now let's get the episode underway. Welcome to Your Bitcoin Story podcast. I'm your host, GG, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by a true innovator in the world of Bitcoin mining, Bob Burnett. Bob is the founder and CEO of Barefoot Mining, a company dedicated to developing horse-class mining sites, and he's a passionate advocate for diversifying the geography, scale, and energy resources of Bitcoin mining. With over 35 years of experience as a technologist, including 13 years at Gateway Inc. as the Chief Technology Officer, Bob has been at the forefront of technological innovation. He has also founded several companies in the Bitcoin mining space and continues to be an evangelist and educator, helping to spear the word about Bitcoin's transformative potential. It's an honor to have Bob with us today to dive deep into his journey and the future of Bitcoin mining. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, GG. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for taking the time. As I mentioned off the record, we had the chance to spend about an hour or so, literally a few hours ago, on X Spaces that was hosted by our good friend Lauren. So we got a little bit of the gist of Bitcoin mining, and it got me really hyped up for this episode. And especially the fact that this, as I mentioned to Bob, is probably one of the first Bitcoin mining specific episodes on the Your Bitcoin Story podcast. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. But before we get into the gists of mining and hashing, Bob, can you share with us, how did you first uncover Bitcoin? What was that like?
Well, my first exposure to it was around 2012. I missed it, like most people did. I didn't do the research, right? And so I missed it. In 2017, came back in. So different people say they're class of this, class of that. I would be class of 2017. Although even that was kind of in a roundabout way. As you mentioned, my background is originally in the personal computer industry. I spent a couple decades in that, primarily designing personal computers and being involved in kind of all that technological development. So in 2017, I received a phone call from somebody from that past. And he said, Bob, I am trying to build an Ethereum mining farm, and I can't get professionally designed Ethereum mining servers, number one. And number two, I can't get NVIDIA chips that I need to power these. So, by the way, I am Bitcoin maxi. I'll just say that
To
now.
clarify.
But the story starts in Ethereum, right? And so one little tidbit of history is that NVIDIA, when NVIDIA was a startup company, early 90s, the first company to design their silicon into a computer was Gateway. So we gave them their chance. Me and kind of my right-hand guy, president of Barefoot Mining, his name's Keith Thomas. He was the head of desktop engineering at Gateway when I was there. And so we called up NVIDIA, and luckily can get to the executive circle pretty easily because of our history. Said, hey, we we're thinking of building a bunch of Ethereum mining servers. If we designed one, can you give us chips? And they were very nice and very grateful for the chance we had given them 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, and said, yeah, we'll support you. So we designed these servers. It was a very large order. It was like 800 units, if I remember right. 800 servers, each with 8 GPUs. So it was, it was a several $1 million of revenue. And we started a company, which we now, the public now knows as Barefoot Mining, to fulfill that order. And and so that was the genesis point. But what happened was we fulfilled that order. We did well with it financially. But we had this design and we went to other people and said, hey, if we make more of these, would you like to buy them? A lot of people started saying yes, but only if we would host for them. So the first guy, by the way, had his own farm, right? We were just selling computers to him. So it was very much just a computer deal. The second group of people, they wanted to mine Ethereum, but they couldn't do it themselves. They needed somebody to do it. So we opened a hosting arm of our company. Did that for a little bit. We still have a tiny little hosting business, but we realized these things were making a lot of money. Fiat mindset, honestly. We said, hey, let's take the profit and use it to buy more equipment for ourselves and start mining ourselves, which we did. Fast forward a few months. At this point, I start wondering what really is Ethereum, and I start digging in. And I don't have a warm fuzzy. So I say I have a technology background. I can understand some things that maybe are easier for me than some other people just because of my past. But I also have a background in economics, interestingly. So I had been studying Austrian thought since like 2001, 2002. And I have a degree in economics too, but it's a bullshit degree in Keynesian shit. So it's not, right?
Not applicable.
Not applicable, but okay. So I started looking at Ethereum and I said, geez, this is a amazingly complex project. And having been involved in several large software projects, they don't come together very well. Like this seemed to be biting off way more than they could chew. And the promises they were making about the capabilities and the time frames turned me off. I'm like, there's just no way this is going to come together. And then number two, I saw the way the governance happened. And even though it was kind of an open sourcey kind of thing, it really wasn't. It was clear that the development had a leader, the movement had a leader, and whether I like the leader or not wasn't relevant. Like, hey, this thing isn't decentralized. It says it's decentralized. It's not, right? And, I knew what decentralization was and the power of it. I'm an old guy and, I saw like what Napster did. I saw what LimeWire did. Like I saw these movements from back very early days of the internet. And even prior to that, I had worked very, very early on in early Linux stuff. And as we were making the transition from Unix to Linux, and like, that's a different world. Like I'm not seeing that. And then the third thing, the fatal blow for me was the announcement, even though it took them a while to get there, that they would be moving from proof of work to proof of stake.
Proof of stake, yeah.
And I thought, well, geez, this, and so all of these things turned me off. And then I went searching for something else and I found Bitcoin. I was aware of Bitcoin, but I found that all the things that I was objecting to with Ethereum, were satisfied by Bitcoin. So interestingly, though, you could say I was a shitcoiner, that I started out as a shitcoiner, but not in the sense of buying shitcoins, but in the sense of actually developing infrastructure for them and said, hey, this is not right. So it's probably a way more long-winded version of this story than people want to hear, but that's my story.
No, it's amazing. And I appreciate it. Bob, you're not the only one. I'm also, if you could say that, the class of 2017, I entered the ICO hype and I did my fair share of shitcoining, not on your level of building an infrastructure and taking on a deeper level, but, just kind of seeing this thing as it's going to revolutionize everything. And, the to touch upon Ethereum, kind of, it was marketed as this world computer, like everything's going to be run on Ethereum. And then we saw that world computer was just a fantasy and didn't go anywhere. And for me also, once they transitioned to proof of stake, I realized, well, that's they're digging their own grave with where they're going. And actually, that's also something that pushed me personally more to look at Bitcoin, because in 2017, to me, everything was blockchain, everything was cryptocurrency. It took me a fair share of 3 years of doing my proof of work to differentiate Bitcoin and all shitcoinery casino. So it's something that a lot of us go through. But yeah, I think we won't dabble on the shitcoinery anymore since this is a Bitcoin podcast. But thank you for sharing that, Bob, with me. I had no idea, essentially, that was kind of how you got your foot through the door. But I want to touch upon now a little bit on barefoot mining and what you guys do. And this kind of, just on SpaceX's earlier today, what I loved your analogy of breaking down the mining sector into the elephants, the horses, and the rabbits. And I mentioned in the introduction where some listeners are probably thinking, what is a horse class mining like? They must be scratching their heads. So maybe you could give a little bit of a breakdown of these three things, because I think it's a really interesting way of breaking down kind of the mining sector where we are today.
I think every organization involved in mining falls fairly cleanly into one of three buckets. And I've used this animal analogy as a way of kind of giving some feel for it. Because we could say small, medium, and large, right? But that doesn't create, yeah, it's very generic, and you don't get any sense of the difference other than, because the difference is way greater than just the size of small, medium, and large. They're fairly radical. So I came up with this method of division. So we'll start with the elephants. The elephants are probably obvious in a way. So you can think of a Riot or a Clean Spark, kind of an organization, and the type of sites that they would build. They build 100 megawatt, 500 megawatt, gigawatt kind of sites. They have no interest in a 1 or 2 megawatt site. The things that they build, in the end, they're very powerful. They're massive. They're powerful, like an elephant is. They take a very long time to implement, though. They take, typically not measured in months, they're measured in like years, 1.5 years, 2 years, to go through the vision of saying, hey, let's say I want a 200 megawatt site in West Texas. Well, between the capital raise, the permitting, the actual build out of the infrastructure, all those sorts of things, it's pretty laborious. It takes a lot. So just like an elephant, it takes a long time for an elephant to gestate and turn into a living, breathing, functioning elephant. It takes a long time for them. Because they're so big and powerful, they are obvious, that they're easy to find. And I say easy to hunt as a result. So in an adversarial environment where politicians and bureaucrats are at odds with our industry, it's fairly easy for them to figure out where to attack, whether that's taxation or innocuous regulation or just flat out bans. Like, all these sorts of things become much, much easier to implement and target those groups. The other end of the spectrum are the rabbits. The rabbits are typically individuals, typically running 1 or 2 units. It could be something tiny like a BitX with 1 terahash per second of hash power. It might be an S19 in a shed or a basement or something like that. Individually, whether that participant is in the network or not is not relevant from the perspective of the network. But collectively, they can be very powerful. And so kind of just like a rabbit, right? I gave this example on the spaces, but if you have a farmer with a big field of lettuce, let's say, and one rabbit is in the field eating a little bit of lettuce, it's no big deal. But if you have an infestation of rabbits, they can eat the whole freaking crop. Right. They can eat the whole crop. If the farmer comes out and says, those damn rabbits, and he tries shooting them, he'll probably hit a couple. But in the process of hitting those, the rest scatter. He'll never catch them all. Right. And they'll be back either eating his field or somebody else's field in the not too distant future. In fact, he may even spread them out, kind of diversify them and make them more powerful.
Centralize them further.
Yes, right. So those are the rabbits. The horses are in the middle. They're the small to medium sized commercial operations. They might be from a few hundred kilowatts in size, which might be enough to run 50 to 100 servers, or, they may be 5 megawatts running 1,500. But they're not massive. They're typically built in containerized solutions. They're mobile. In some of our operations, we've been up in as quick as 4 to 6 weeks. We can go from concept to boom, we're hashing. Not every time, but sometimes we can go that quickly. And if something happens, we're impaired, we feel a threat, whatever, we can move. Like we can, pick up and be gone somewhat overnight. We can flee. So again, not to the same degree that the rabbits can, but we have this immunity. We're kind of like guerrilla fighters almost, like, we can move around, right? On laying on top of that, though, is also another concept, which is, I use the terms wild and captive. It's kind of an extension of on-grid and off-grid, but I think there's more to it. So wild mining would typically mean that you are producing your own power. And this is typically done at the horse class size. Usually the rabbits don't want to produce their own power, although you could with some solar or wind or something at a small scale at the home, but you could be a wild rabbit, doing your own power generation. But typically it's us, stranded gas, flared gas, hydroelectric facility, like those sorts of things. But like in our case, those are assets that we own. So when I say like hydroelectric, I'm not talking about connecting to the grid that's powered by it. I'm talking about running your own hydroelectric facility and generating your own power. They're also almost always privately held. They almost have to be privately held to be wild. They are owned by groups that can make their own rules and make their own decisions without outside pressures from the fiat system. See, the big guys are almost all captive. They have the power of big capital. They've gone public. They have the power of capital markets, and that's part of how they could fund these big monstrosities. But it also makes them beholden to Wall Street. It makes them beholden to the perception of their shareholders about the best course of action for the country, for the company. And that perception is almost always fiat based. So if you become captive in that situation, your power source is permission, meaning you need the approval of the utility provider, but you also need all of the government approvals and
regulatory
bureaucrats
stuff
to think you're a good guy. If so even with big fancy contracts, at the end of the day, you don't control your destiny. You are beholden to somebody else. Which, if you think about it, is not a very Bitcoin thing.
No.
Right? It's kind of almost like holding all of your Bitcoin on an exchange is kind of the equivalent, right? So the big miners are kind of in that same situation. So in the intro, which I appreciate you reading, I said my company is focused on wild horse mining, and I think I focus on that personally. And I'm also an advocate for the rabbits. And I'm personally a rabbit too. 2 meters away from me right now is a little BitX running.
I've got one running as well. So I'm a small rabbit as well in this big pond.
So, I think the heart and soul of the Bitcoin network are the rabbits and the wild horses. And to the degree, we can get into why I say this later, to the degree Bitcoin fulfills its destiny, it will do so on the backs of the rabbits and the wild horses. That's my belief, that we can't count on the elephants to fulfill the destiny. I'm not saying if the world is all elephants that Bitcoin can't find a measure of success, but it's probably not the Bitcoin that you have in your head. It's kind of a captured Bitcoin that doesn't have all the elements that I think most of us are here for.
And it doesn't have the concept, if I may chip in, of the whole essence of sovereignty and freedom, right? Like the whole basis of what Satoshi gave us was to give us this power over our own money, not to be essentially this kind of 2.0 ingested of banks. And what we're seeing now, kind of this euphoria with huge companies, the MicroStrategies, Meta Planets of the world, and governments hoarding Bitcoin, storing it away. That's not the future I kind of envision for Bitcoin, where there's essentially, it's a freedom tool for the people to utilize to benefit themselves. And that same thing applies in mining. It doesn't make sense to have the mining infrastructure being run by elephants where they dictate the rules and how the future evolves of it. So I fully agree with you.
Yeah, and when I say we, the collective we of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin community, we control that destiny, because you're running a BitX, I'm running a BitX. I'll just even speak to the rabbits. Millions and millions of rabbits has power, and we have to exercise that power. If we don't exercise that power, the elephants will take over. And the elephants, by the way, are not just your current vision of Riot and CleanSpark and the big quote unquote mining companies. I'll come back to that later, because they're really not mining companies. But there are incentives which we may want to get into, where we should expect that nation states mine. We should expect big financial institutions to mine. And I think it would be hypocritical for us, even though the spirit of Bitcoin was the one you and I just talked about. It's hypocritical for us to say they can't participate or they shouldn't participate, because if we can't select who comes in and participates, that defeats the whole purpose. So we can't be hypocrites. They have to be welcome, but we have to know that they probably are incented to come. And the more that they understand this, the more they'll want to come at greater scale. We have to keep our voice, that I think is, like you said, we're going to be more focused on freedom, immutability, censorship resistance. Those are things that those of us from the class of 2017 and before are probably here for. They aren't going to come in for the same reasons, and but they still have the right to come in. So if we want to protect that perspective, then we have to participate.
Agreed. The whole basis of Bitcoin being an open protocol, there's no gateways of you can come in. There's no kind of sanctioning, if I may use that word, of who can participate, who can't. So I fully agree with you. But of course, there's different incentives and different kind of, I don't know if I want to call it agendas, but like different goals the different parties in the network have. And I mean, at the end of the day, if they're coming in and bringing in extra hash power, essentially they're making Bitcoin more secure. So to a certain extent, they are helping the overall security of the network to a certain extent.
It's a mixed bag, though, to be honest.
There's the pros and cons, like in everything.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems sometimes, you mentioned that maybe I'm one of the first people to come on your show from a mining perspective. I think a lot of people oversimplify mining. They oversimplify the incentives. There's a lot of people that say, the incentives are kind of always put us back on course. If something gets off course, don't worry, because the incentives will push it back on. I'm not of that mindset. I do not believe it's that simple. And I believe that a lot of people don't appreciate that different people may have different incentives. And I'm using people as a euphemism. It could be organizations or even countries. So you can't project your incentives or the incentives of the groups that are largely in place today to the future. That doesn't work. We represent, maybe, it depends on your number, but let's just say we represent global adoption of 1% or less. So if, let's say, we have global adoption at 25%, the incentive structure of the next 24% might be completely different. And they may not. And we can go into some of those things if you'd like. But we have to be careful. We have to be vigilant. I've been accused, if that's too strong a word, of often being, how can you say, maybe having a negative perspective. And I want to say first and foremost, even if in the rest of this conversation, I am hugely optimistic about the future of Bitcoin. I'm here because I think it is hope. And I believe we have an excellent chance of winning. And I believe that if we behave properly, and I'm going to say we, in the context of the current Bitcoin community and the spirit of if we continue to be vocal and active, then Bitcoin can win, and the spirit in which Bitcoin exists now can largely carry forward. But I'll also say that we are attacking the world's power and wealth structure. We can't expect them to not want to participate, number one. And two, if they don't feel they can participate or they can't win by participating, then they will attack. Yeah. And it's probably some combination of both of those things. And I believe Bitcoin can be money for the next 1,000 years. And so, I'm an engineer and I'm a technologist. My background is in a lot of mathematics. So, like, to simplify something, like if I call out a threat, we'll probably talk about some of those threats today. But if I call out a threat and you say, well, there's a 0.1% chance of that threat taking hold in the next year, I think a lot of people kind of think, well, okay, that's not so bad. We have a 99.9% chance of it not happening. But if we want Bitcoin to be money for the next 1,000 years, a 0.1% chance means that in that window, it will, whatever that threat is, will happen, right? So we have to be prepared for it. And we don't know which year in the 1,000 it's going to happen. That's a random event. And there's more than one greater risk in the network right now. So, we haven't won. We can still fail, and we can fail in a ball of flames, like the whole thing flames out, but we can also fail by death of 1,000 paper cuts of, over the next generation, just kind of losing the very essence and finding ourselves back into something that kind of is like the fiat system, a lot of centralization.
Imagine this: the market's crashing, exchanges are freezing withdrawals, but you are cool as a cucumber because you are unruggable. By joining my Become Unruggable mentoring program, you'll get one-on-one support to safely move your Bitcoin into self-custody. I'll guide you step by step at your own pace, as well as making sure you have a rock-solid recovery plan in place. Take control, stay sovereign, get in touch with me via X, Nostr, or send me an email at becomeunruggable@proton.me, and let's make you unruggable.
Yeah, no, I think we should definitely let's jump down the threat rabbit hole, because I think this is a good point to talk a little bit about it, and kind of, because people a lot of times they say kind of the block wars in 2017, that was kind of the last big war, we won it, and now kind of Bitcoin's unstoppable. But there's a lot of like threats that people don't consider, so maybe we can dig into those now.
Yeah, I think you're right, by the way. I'm glad you called that out. I think Bitcoin's been through a couple things that I think have created undue confidence. That's one. I think we survived Mt. Gox.
Yeah.
We survived the block size wars. We survived the China mining ban.
Yeah.
Those are all like black swan events that we survived. And then on the other side, we have things like the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve executive order signed by Trump. We have the BlackRock ETFs, and we have these other things that feel like everybody's supporting us. So there's this, I think, feeling of invincibility. That is the first threat. The threat of being comfortable that you've won is the single greatest threat, that you're comfortable, because it means you stop paying attention.
That's a great point.
So that's the worst one. So that's one. Second one, this is maybe a good time for me to define a couple things. So the word mining is greatly misunderstood and misused. So there are very few mining companies in the world. There are a bunch of companies that call themselves mining companies. Same with people. There's a bunch of people that say, I am a miner, but they're not a miner.
They're hashers.
They're hashers, right? And so the mining process, go back to early Satoshi days. Every node used to be enabled this way. Every node had the mining kernel in it, and everybody mined. Some would turn it off, but everybody was running a node and mining, and that was kind of, I think, what Satoshi was kind of thinking of, millions of miners and all these rabbits, right? I mean, he didn't have that terminology, but he had all these rabbits out there. And what was happening was, and what still happens today is, to mine, you need to run a node. You manage a mempool. Just for clarity, too, if you don't talk a lot, there is no such thing as the mempool. Every node has its mempool.
We've had Simon on the show, so we went deep into the mempool analogies.
Okay, wonderful. So that node has its mempool, and it decides what transactions it wants to reflect in its mempool. When the network, we'll take a step. Let's pretend a block just boom. Network got a new block. Time for a new one. Well, the miner looks at its node, says, what is the new mempool look like now? His mempool. He then creates a block template by picking a set of transactions, a subset of the transactions in the mempool to go in the block. The miner can pick whatever they want. It's a very important point. The miner can pick whatever they want. I think there's a perception that they pick the most expensive ones. They usually do in today's world. Okay. But we'll talk about changing incentives and how, today's world, people are primarily incented to do that. Although almost everybody picks their own first, just to be real clear too. So if you're a miner creating block templates and you have your own transaction sitting there, you pick yours. And you may not pay. Yeah, you probably don't put it in at the highest fee. You may put it in at no fee, right? So you create the template. You create the Coinbase transaction, which, again, if you've been down this path before, the Coinbase transaction is a unique transaction in Bitcoin in that it has no inputs. It's only outputs, and it's the subsidy plus the fees. But you could think of it as clean Bitcoin or virgin Bitcoin. And that output can go to one address or it could go to hundreds. Okay. And so, like, if you look at, and I don't know if you said it in the intro, I just want people to know, I'm on the board at Ocean. I'm an investor in Ocean. I am a huge advocate of Ocean, but I want everybody to know that I have that bias.
It's a good bias to have, and we'll definitely go into Ocean because that was one of my questions that I wanted to touch upon.
Yeah. So anyway, this is all part of mining, right? And you create the Coinbase transaction, and then you hash, and you try to hash, that block, and you try to be the first in the world to beat the difficulty level, and all that. Well, all of that is mining. Most companies that call themselves miners are only the hashers, and in doing so, it's certainly their prerogative. I'm not necessarily being negative to them, but they abdicate all those other responsibilities to the pool. And there's also one other attribute that's important in the block creation, and that's the signaling for protocol changes. So SegWit or Taproot or like those sort of things, there will be future ones. There's some right now that people could signal for if they wish.
With CTV, hopefully.
CTV would be an example. Yeah. And there's OpCat and that's a whole nother debate about what's good. But the only way to vote for those things is to control a block template. And so whether you're for it or against it, I actually don't care. In the context of this conversation, I don't care. What I care about is people voting. It's kind of the same as, if you're a citizen of a country and you choose not to vote, you're not participating in the process. So and Bitcoin is dependent on people participating. And so right now what has happened is the hashing community has become the hashing community because instead of the mining community, because they've abdicated largely all of this responsibility to just a couple companies. Foundry is the largest pool in the world with over 30% of the hash rate, meaning they create 30% of the templates, and they only create one template every time they're trying to mine a block, right? So there's no diversity. Then there's Ant Pool, which on the surface is the second biggest pool. But if you study the block template creation, what you can see is there's about 7 or 8 other pools that are proxies for Antmain, or excuse me, Ant Pool, which is really Bitmain. And they're over 40% of the hash rate. So you have, give or take a little bit, 70% of the templates are coming from 2 companies.
That's crazy.
And there's a lot of problems with that. And you know, we talked about some of them. There could be a very easy path for 2 governments cooperating, granted they'd be the US and China, to implement censorship. I'm not saying they will, but I'm saying it's there. We've given them a easy path to this. Whether they do it or not, I don't know, but why would we do that? That's stupid of us as a community to give them that opportunity, number one. Number two, even if they are good actors, why do we want just 2 perspectives on almost all the template creation? You know, what don't we want thousands? I think we do. And we want thousands of different minds and opinions deciding what goes in templates. Is probably not like I do not like inscriptions. I do not like ordinals.
Me neither. We were on the same page on that one.
Yeah. But I respect the right of people to create templates that include them more than I hate the inscription. So I hope everybody chooses to not include them, but I respect your right to do so more than anything else. It's kind of like free speech. It's our form of free speech in the Bitcoin community, right? Like, I'm going to respect your right to make racist statements or criticize the government or do whatever, even though I may hate both of those. You know, your perspective. In fact, I'll even fight for your right to do that. So that's it. That's important. Here's another one though, that some of this may be new to you, but here's the one that should scare everybody in the short term. I tweeted this the other day. There's a general belief, it's even part of the education system of Bitcoin, that if I make a Bitcoin transaction, let's say I'm going to buy your car, GG, and so we agree on a price of 1 Bitcoin, I'm going to buy your car, I send you it. How many blocks should you wait for that to be, quote unquote, reach final settlement, right? And so what would your answer be there?
Like 6?
How?
No?
6, right.
I believe that's what it is on Sparrow Wallet. When you do a transaction, right. It's
so the
completes in 6.
You're correct. It's part of the language or the education that we give people. It's often built into the wallets. That's this sort of thing. Jameson Lopp has a calculator that says, based on how much hash rate sits within a given mining organization, how many confirmations should you wait? Okay. Well, Ant Pool, with 40-some% of the hash rate, the number is several hundred confirmations to reach 95% confidence against reorganization. Okay, because that's what you're fighting. You're fighting against the reorganization of the change. This is a huge issue, and it affects us. It's not a hypothetical. Well, it's a hypothetical that somebody could reorganize. And this is, again, where when I posted this, there were a few people that criticized me and said, oh, you're just spreading FUD. There's no economic incentive for people to do that. And my response is, I don't know what people's incentives are. What I do know is the math tells me that, you know, confirmed by Jameson's calculator, Luke Dasher's done the same math. I did very back of the napkin stuff to confirm it further. Like, this is real. And you should, in today's world, to be honest, if it was the opposite, you were buying my car before I gave you the keys and the title, I might wait 15 or 20. And I think that's where as a practical matter. But the math really says I should probably wait about a week for that many blocks for the right number of blocks to clear.
I don't get it. Who dictates this confirmation number?
Because, okay, so let me see if I can explain it. This is precipitated because Foundry, with 30% of the hash rate, won 9 blocks in a row.
Yeah, I saw that. It was the other day.
Just the other day, yeah. And then on the heels of that, I sent this tweet. Okay. All right. So Foundry or Antpool with that much hash power. Let's say that happened. Okay, I sent you 1 Bitcoin that got included in a block. Boom. Okay. Now, and let's say that came from Ocean, which has roughly 1% of the world's hash rate. And let's say that was block number 900,000. So hopefully you keep all that in your head. So now, Foundry could say, hey, I really want to own block 900,000. I don't want Ocean's template to be the one that won. I want to win. So they ignore my block, 900,000, and they mine a different 900,000. And if they mine that 900,000 and they also mine 900,001, they now have what's called the longer chain. And so they publish that, and it essentially
bypasses yours.
It's called orphaning. Yeah, so mine, that one goes away, and I don't actually get. Ocean did not win the block. The blockchain will not reflect Ocean winning the block. It will say block 900,000 was won by Foundry, which is, by the way, when the miner gets paid from the Coinbase transaction, the Bitcoin network does not make that spendable for 100 blocks.
100 blocks, yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
This is the reason, right? In case it gets overlapped.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. So hopefully you can extrapolate the simple example I gave you to just saying that we saw Foundry win 9 in a row. Okay. And so if for some reason they were motivated, and we don't know what that reason could be, but they could be motivated to say, I really want to own block 900,000. They could build a longer chain, and they'd have a chance that's not infinitesimal, even if they had to chase it for 10 or 12 or 15 blocks. But eventually, if they build the longer chain, they could. So, like, you can see why 6 isn't enough just by the fact that they won 9 in a row. Like that in of itself tells you 6 is not enough. They just won 9.
In a world where water spills, fires rage, and pets chew everything in sight, only one thing can save your Bitcoin seed phrase: StampSeed. Don't let a coffee accident turn your Bitcoin into Bitcoin gone. With StampSeed, your seed phrase is engraved in metal, safe from elements, toddlers, and your own clumsiness. Use promo code BTCSTORY at stampseed.com for 15% off, because in the end, metal always wins. And now, let's get back to the episode.
Personal question. So, for example, when I do a transaction from my cold storage on Sparrow wallet, and the transaction is confirmed, I see it on the mempool, it clears, it's got 1 transaction, and then it does the circle to load to 6. Is there a chance that if another block template replaces the one where my transaction was confirmed, gets erased, or what happens? Or is just a different miner takes ownership of that block? The transaction still goes through, right? The transaction doesn't kind of get lost, if that makes sense.
So let's say again, that was block 900,000 and you got it included.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then Foundry does this thing that I just talked about. Okay. The worst case would be that and let's say it's 9 blocks later.
Mm-hmm.
And they, in their chain, they never included your transaction. It would be as though it never happened. So it would be, you could basically expect it to be back in the mempool, hoping to be included in another block.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, yeah. So you still couldn't double spend it, but it could also cause a fork. So if it's an ugly situation, because there's a possibility that some of the nodes could say, well, that block that had Ocean at 900,000 and then started getting built on, we want to follow that chain.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is Foundry and Antpool are going to mine on a different chain. That let's say they do. So now we have a split, and it's what hash power follows which chain, and also which nodes follow which chain, kind of dictate the winner. That's why, you and I joined in 2017, but if you read the block size wars, this is the kind of thing that we didn't, when that change happened, we didn't know where will the nodes and the hash rate follow. Will they follow what's now known as Bitcoin Cash, or will they follow what we call Bitcoin? And it was because the miners and the nodes, and there's some economic nodes like Coinbase, where did they go? They went with the one we now call Bitcoin or BTC. So this is something we do not want to happen, right? And so the problem is when individual organizations, I don't want to implicate them as being evil. They let other people judge whether or not they are. Like, I don't know really anybody in Antpool, but I know the Foundry folks personally. All seem like great guys. I don't have any issue. Although I've told them specifically, you guys are too big. I'm up front with them. You guys are too big. You need to break it up, break it into 2 pools or 3 pools, or do something different. And, they don't see the problem. And some of the executives at some of the bigger hashing organizations don't think there is a problem, and they keep directing lots of hash rate there.
Do you think, sorry for interrupting, Bob, do you think that's their actual number one threat, that they got comfortable? They think they're kind of won it, they're kind of in the league and nobody's going to take them over? Do you think that's the reason that they don't want to change?
I think there's an aspect of it. I think they buy that. This is what I get from a lot of them. It's very, what I would call reactionary. They're like, well, if we ever think there is a problem, then we will change.
Okay.
And to me, that's stupid. Like, well, okay, if the burglar gets in your house, then I'm going to worry about
getting
what
an alarm
to do to stop burglars. Like, well, okay, like that's one strategy. I would prefer to keep the burglar out of the house to begin with. Even if there's only a small chance that the burglar gets in, because I think we could debate how realistic especially the short window, these things could happen. Because the criticism I've gotten for being a bit alarmist about it is that, again, there's no economic incentive. Nobody would want to create a hard fork. Nobody would want to potentially, try to double spend. Nobody would try to do these sorts of things because it would be too disruptive. And it would destroy the value of Bitcoin and I don't buy that. I don't buy that as a legitimate reason to not be concerned about it, because I don't know what their incentives are. And I think over time, who mines, which is a completely different topic, will change. And what I believe will be the elephants of the future, their economic incentive is not related to the block reward, which is the subsidy and the fees that the miners get. That's a cherry on top to the control that they get. I think that's, I'm not talking the horses and the rabbits, I'm talking the elephants, right?
We're talking about template creation, right? Them dictating what gets included in every block, right? That's kind of their main goal.
Yeah. And I gave this example on the spaces. I've given it a few other times, but I say if, I was in charge of a small country right now, honestly, even a big country, but especially a smaller country, I would want to protect the economic sovereignty of my country. And I think a lot of people are missing the boat pushing strategic Bitcoin reserve. Not that in and of itself is a horrible thing, but I think they've missed the bigger thing, which is a country achieves economic sovereignty the moment they have an appreciable percentage control over block template creation. Because even if they have enough hash power to on average win 1 block a week, okay, which takes like a quarter of the world's hash power. 1/4 of 1% of the world's hash power will get you about, well, actually, that'll get you 2 a week. But that's all it takes. Okay. And at that point, you would have control over 8 to 10,000-ish transactions that no other country in the world can prevent you from doing. So the business of that government, the business of the corporations, the business of the citizens could still happen, even in a case where the rest of the world, or I should say the rest of the world, but most of the world hated you and was trying to kick you off, just like the US did to Russia during the Ukraine war. And I'd say, I think that was a massive mistake by the US and Biden to do that, because I think what it did, it may have solved, it just shows like the short-term thinking, high time preference thinking that comes out of politicians. They may have solved the problem. They inflicted damage on Russia, no doubt about it. Okay. What they did, though, is they just told 200 other countries of the world, when we don't like you,
we'll cut you off.
We will use money as a weapon. We will kick you out of the system. And like, I think it's immoral, and I think it doesn't work. Like that because all it does is incentivizes the creation of an alternative. And we've seen BRICS, kind of come out, but they don't need BRICS, and the Russians have already admitted they are using Bitcoin to do international trade.
Yeah. I can tell you, Bob, from firsthand experience. I actually left Europe last year and moved to Russia. I live in St. Petersburg, Russia, so I've kind of seen firsthand.
I didn't know that.
I'm probably one of the lone Russian-based Bitcoin podcasters, but it's interesting kind of seeing what everyday life is there like post-sanctions and post-cutting them off from the SWIFT network. And I can tell you their banking, which essentially, in a sense, they're building their own banking templates. Like they built their own banking. It's called Mir, which translates to, ironically, the world system. And it operates so much smoother. You can send anyone money just through a mobile number, just like you have in Africa. Like things are so advanced. So actually, like the West, and the Europe and US kind of sanctioning Russia of trying to suffocate it, they're thriving in their own sense and building everything themselves. So it's, as you said, high time preference, kind of the Biden administration trying to kind of play big ball and trying to kill them off has to a certain extent made them stronger in some sense. But of course, the dealings with other countries, that was kind of a burden. But now with Bitcoin, as you mentioned, and it was publicly stated, especially a few months ago, they had it in St. Petersburg where I'm based. They had the BRICS summit, and they announced that they do settlement for trade with Bitcoin. And on the point of Bitcoin mining, it's not publicly known, but like a lot of people like highly suspect that the Russian government's been mining Bitcoin for years, and they're not the sort of people that are going to come out and announce it like the Trump administration, like we're doing this directive, but like secretly, like there is so many old Soviet factories that are just standing abundant, and there's so much free energy, hydraulic and gas. I mean, gas is so cheap there, and just general electricity, it's peanuts compared to the West, that I just don't buy that they haven't been mining. And the fact that now they're settling trade with Bitcoin, like it just further solidifies that they have strong skin in the game for a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, as you said, there's the saying something like, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
So like if like that move by Biden was stupid because it wasn't a fatal blow, and anybody could have told you it wasn't a fatal blow. Did it hurt? Sure, I'm sure it did. But you're also correct in that what also happened is it's accelerating. So like in the fiat system, as you said, they're able to leapfrog because they weren't burdened by this other thing. They could leapfrog and implement new technologies that even in the fiat system allow more peer-to-peer-ish, still centralized, but more kind of ish, but anyway, more peer-to-peer stuff. And then secondly, I think it's accelerating their curve. My guess would be they started mining, that they do mine Bitcoin, and they started mining Bitcoin to generate treasury. But then now they have some template creation capability. They probably have the ability to control. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but I think there's estimates of 10-ish% of the world's hash rate being in Russia right now. And if that's even remotely true, that's a hell of a lot of blocks that they can create if they wish. Very, very powerful. And I would say if you're North Korea, if you're Iran, if you're, a country that's considered on the outs by the West, you're probably doing it to some degree already. But what's really concerning is the middle countries, like the countries. I used Israel as an example in the spaces because somebody always hates Israel, right? Like there's, I'm not saying they should. This is not meant to be a political thing, but I'm just saying, like, hey, somebody always hates them, so they have to be prepared. And in fact, there's an interesting story. I tell this one sometimes. I did an episode of my show. It's just called Old Man Yells on this one once. So one of my favorite movies is a movie called World War Z. It's a zombie movie with Brad Pitt. Have you ever seen it, GG?
No, I've heard of World War Z, but I haven't seen the movie.
All right.
But maybe now I will after you tell the story.
Yeah. Well, and they probably don't talk a lot about zombie movies on your show, but yeah, this is, I think, an interesting and pertinent tale. So a synopsis of at least the beginning of the movie is there's this outbreak, right? There's this like virus thing, people get bit, they turn into zombies, right? And it happens very rapidly. It's spreading all over the world. Brad Pitt works for the UN, and he's part of a group trying to figure out what the hell is happening and how do they stop it. So they find out that Jerusalem in Israel is like the only city in the world that's had no infections. So he flies to Jerusalem to figure out what's going on, and what had happened was before the outbreak hit global proportions, they built a massive wall around the entire city to prevent anybody from getting in. Like nobody could get in, right? So he flies there and he's talking to the head of the Israeli National Security Council. And he says, like, how did you know to do this? And the guy, the head of the Security Council, says, well, it's because of the 10th man. And he said, well, of course, what's the 10th man? He said, well, in 1972, when there was the Israeli athletes several were murdered in the Olympic Village, he said there had been messages that this threat existed, and they were disregarded as frivolous. But of course, then it actually happened. And I believe, I've done a little research, I believe that's largely true, by the way. So he said then there were a couple other, I don't remember the specifics, there were a couple other similar times when there was threats of violence or war, and the Israelis didn't pay attention. And they had some knowledge that this could happen. So he said the Security Council, which is a 10-person council, instituted a policy. And the policy was, if when presented with a threat, the first 9 members of the Security Council all say we should ignore it, it's not legitimate, it is imperative, mandatory, that the 10th person take it seriously and present a case back to the rest of the council as to why it should be taken seriously. So kind of like a devil's advocate on steroids, you could think of it. And so and that's why they built the wall in Jerusalem, was they had some knowledge that there was these weird reports coming in different areas of the world that there was like a zombie thing, and
and the 10th
everybody
person
else
said, build the wall, we're isolating.
Build the wall, right. So actually it's a pretty good movie, so I do recommend it. But I feel like sometimes the 10th man in Bitcoin, or at least one of them, and I think we have to be 10th men, that the attitude, this is that complacency thing we talked about, that if you take the 10th man attitude, the thing when everybody else says, don't worry, oh, the incentives are there, it's a Nash equilibrium, it's a whatever, like, that almost raises my, I don't know what
That's when you should
it almost
worry.
makes me, it makes me worry more and makes me think through, well, what really is the threat? How serious is it? Or to try to look deeper. I think one of the interesting things, like, you said this is in your show, you haven't had a chance to dive into mining a lot. And I've spent the last 8 years in mining now. And as I've gone deeper, I didn't know everything I know 8 years ago, of course, but I've realized that until you really understand mining, you really don't understand Bitcoin. Like, the heart and soul of Bitcoin exists right there. And
It's
we've
the heartbeat
covered
of the whole network.
exactly. And if we disrupt that heartbeat,
The body dies.
yeah, then
Simply put.
we're certainly not going to be healthy, right? Not everybody has to know every intricacy about mining, but I love that you have a bit axe, for instance, and I've become a big advocate for this. I don't know how many I've sold for them, but I continue to do it because I think if you get a bit axe, you have to set it up. You configure it for a pool. And then at some point, what I'm hoping you do is you go through and you learn how to be a hasher first, right? So you will participate, and that helps. It helps the network a tiny bit, but it helps you understand. And then the next step is, if you're not running a node, you run a node. And then once you're running that node, I would recommend, again, this is Ocean,
Then
but I
datum
recommend that
steps in.
the datum steps in. Exactly. And now you're creating templates. And even if you're doing it with your 1 terahash, God bless you, because you've now added another template to the queue. Because right now in the world, I think on Ocean, the last count I heard was we have something like, I don't know, 100 different templates being created simultaneously. I've got a couple of them with my operations. But we went from the world having like 6 templates to the world having 100. So we've like 20x'd it already, just from the Ocean introduction in September, something like that. But we want thousands. And as I'm sure you've seen, some people with BitXs have won blocks. Don't count on it, but you can win a block. You actually
But it is
can.
possible.
And yeah, it is possible. Right.
I want to definitely now dive in a little bit more into Ocean. The listeners must have been hearing you and I drop the word ocean mining, but kind of, can you give like a quick TLDR on ocean mining? I certainly know and I really support what Ocean does, but to some listeners who are new to the space and have no idea what Ocean does and the benefits compared to the other pools, what would you say to them?
Yeah. Okay. So first, what is the real role of a pool? The real role of a pool is to create a mechanism for economic stability amongst those hashing. So if you and I, GG, if there's a lottery and there's 1,000,000 to 1 odds, and we're each going to buy 1 ticket, we can improve our odds of winning by 50. If you and I have a gentleman's agreement that if I win, I'll give half to you and vice versa, right? That's the basic concept of it, that as a smaller miner, like I won, my company is big enough. We win blocks on a regular basis, but even then we're not big enough. Like we can count on in a given month how many we're going to win. Like we won one yesterday, but it would be very inconsistent because I might win 3 1 month and 1 the next month. And I have payroll, I have energy bills, I have things I have to pay. So if that inconsistency creates, and a pool can smooth that. Okay. That's why pools have existed. And it goes back to like 2011 when the pool started. Back, I think it was 2012. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but it was about then. Luke Dasher, who's the CEO of Ocean and a Bitcoin Core contributor, big part of the block size wars and the winning side winning and all that, right? So Luke had created a pool called Elegius that ran back then and won something on the order of 300,000 blocks.
Wow.
For the Bitcoin network. It's a big number. I can look it up as we're talking.
I had no idea about that. I've known of Luke Jr. for a while and kind of his input and his...
I'm going to give you the number.
But 350,000 blocks? That's huge. That's like give or take,
Oh,
like
I'm
nearly
sorry.
40%, no? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Not
I'm
350.
so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's about 12,000 blocks. It's mined 350,000
Okay.
of
Wow.
the 21 million. So anyway, still big, right? Not as big as I said, but it's still a really big number. Okay. So anyway, he ran that pool from that period to 2017. He did it for nothing, by the way. He never made money on it. It was a zero fee pool. He never made money on it. At some point, he said, "Well, I've done enough. I want to focus on other things. It's a lot of work." So he shut it down. Between shutting it down in 2017 and 2023, which is when I became involved with it, a lot changed. And basically, the thing we talked about before was we saw the number of pools significantly decrease. We saw a massive concentration of hash rate around a couple pools. So even as we sit here today, the top 6 pools create 90% of the templates, have 90% of the hash rate, just 6. So he said, hey, and also we lost, nobody was creating templates anymore as a result of this. None of the pools were transparent. So what would happen is, like if you're out there and you get a bid axe, I've already picked on Foundry, but I really don't mean to pick on them. But if you do, go get a Foundry account. Well, first, good luck getting through the KYC process.
Wow,
Number
there's
2,
KYC to be mining on their pool.
Yeah, most of the pools now require KYC.
Wow, I had no
So
idea
that's
about
number 1. Number 2, what you'll find is you do make money. They will pay you. But they're not paying you money from the Coinbase transaction. What's happening is you're essentially leasing your hash rate to them, and they're going to pay you every 10 minutes, whether they want a block or not. They're going to pay you kind of for your time. You don't know the formula, though. Like, there's no way for you to validate that the hash rate that you've contributed, let's say it was like if you had 1% of the hash rate and you contributed to, there's no way for you to validate that you're getting paid 1% of the payouts.
because you can't see what's the total pool, right? It's hidden.
Right. And if GG, I think you already told me you're working with Ocean, you'll find all those things are transparent. You know how many shares you have, what percentage of the pool you have, what percentage of the payout you're entitled to. All those things are transparent. And so Luke said, hey, we've lost all of this stuff, like this visibility to the network, what's going on. All of this power is being abdicated. Luke ended up in a conversation with Jack Dorsey of Twitter fame, who's an avid Bitcoiner, right? They were at a conference together, and Jack said to Luke, hey, we got to get this thing fixed, and let's restart your pool. And he provided the first commitment to money to the pool. A few weeks after that, I a couple of the Ocean guys had heard me speak about some of my concerns, and they approached me actually at a conference. Mark, who's the CEO, and Mechanic, who's kind of their key spokesperson, marketing person. They approached me and said, hey, we heard you talk, and let me in private. So we ended up having a 4-hour dinner. And by the end of it, I shook hands, and I became the first company to commit hash rate to Ocean. And I said, I'm in. I committed hash rate to them. Over the course of the next few weeks, continued to talk with them. Our alignment philosophically is very, very strong. So I have a small fund. I committed, I think I'm the second largest contributor of capital after Jack into Ocean. I joined the board as well. And, because, with the vision, like, hey, we have to decentralize this thing, and we have to do everything we can. And it goes in steps. And I will say too, I was honored the Ocean launch event, which occurred in late November of 2023, was done at one of my facilities. I have a hydroelectric facility in South Carolina, and like Jack was there, Max and Stacy were there, several, Preston Pish was there. Lots of prominent people from the Bitcoin community came to support us, and So it was an honor to do that. And then ironically, we were very small at that point. I think we had at that point, I hadn't even directed much of my hash rate to it. We were just starting, right? I think we had 30 petahashes in the pool.
Oh, wow.
Which is small.
Yeah.
And we won a block. It was one of my machines. So one of my great honors is, and I know the exact machine. One of the cool things about Ocean.
You have famously the stickers, right? When you put it on the machine.
I got the first sticker, the first person to put a sticker on the machine. And, so it's a very cool moment in history was to, mine the first Bitcoin block.
I interrupted you there with the stickers, but I think you were going to say that essentially you are the only pool that can identify the actual machine that found
Correct.
the block.
Yeah. Not only the machine, even the entity. So I know the exact machine, I have thousands now in there. Like if I win a block like I did the other day, I did yesterday, I know the exact one and it gets a sticker. If I'm mining with Foundry, so I've already got that. I don't know. I know that they won a block. I have no idea if I am the one that won the block. Yeah. In fact, here I got this. Those watching. So this, in fact, I was just at a conference. Luke just gave me this.
Nice. You've got your block.
Commemorative. Oh, it says, from Luke. He gave me that as a gift the other day.
Amazing.
So that's a one of a kind piece there.
No, for sure. And I was going to say in such a short time, so you were kind of saying the inception of, or I would call it the restart of Ocean and kind of on its next chapter of life journey, you had 30 petahash of power. And now, so to say, give or take a little bit more than a year and a half later, it's significantly grown, right?
Yeah, we're at, I think 6.2 when I checked this morning, exahashes. So it's a little less than 1% of the network hash rate. But what's significant about it is what's hard for any pool. There's a new pool just started, Demand Pool. I wish them well. I think
supposedly another ant pool proxy, but we'll see. That's what the speculation is.
Well, Demand is supposed to implement Stratum v2 and allow template creation. So they're not open yet, but like I said, I wish them well. But where was I going with that? Shoot.
Mempool size, we said about starting small, growing.
So we're at the point where, when you're tiny, the problem is that at 30 exahashes, while we did win a block, and then we won another one 3 days later, astronomically lucky. But then we went 18 days or something like that without winning another one. That's the problem, is that it doesn't, that lottery example I gave you, if you're tiny, it doesn't work as well. But now we're at the point, and that was a resistance point. It's kind of ironic, right? So we would approach other hashing companies that wanted to be miners. We'd say, hey, come join us. And they go, well, if you were just a little bigger, we would join you. And we go, well, if you join us, we are a little bigger. And so there's this vicious thing.
Chicken and egg situation, right? I want to be bigger, but I can't without you, and I don't want to join you because you're not big enough.
Right. But God bless the plebs, because they slowly started adopting. Right now, I can tell you we have 1,307 unique participants in the pool. This is public, by the way.
Yeah. It's all on the website.
You can follow the website. So, and some of them are people with a tiny amount of hash rate, but that keep, that all adds up. Well, now that we're at over 6 exahashes and the network hash rate's at 800 and something, that means that we have roughly 75%, 0.75% of 1%, 75% of 0.75%. But anyway, with 150 blocks a day, 0.75 times that means we get 0.0075 times that means we get one a day. So that I munched that whole thing.
On average.
Yeah, on average we get one a day. I think in March we won 26 or 27 blocks.
And just the other day you won 2 blocks in a row, which I think that was the first time, right?
Correct. It had never happened before. Right. Now it becomes a lot more viable, right? So, if if you're a big company and you're worried about the stabilization, because we kind of glossed over, I don't think I mentioned it at all. Part of the reason that so much centralization has occurred is because of a payout method called FPPS, full paper share. And the idea behind that is that, as I think I did say this, it's basically the mining pool saying, hey, I'm just going to lease your hash rate. And I've got a calculation, so I'm going to pay you every 10 minutes. Every time a block gets mined, whether that pool wins it or not, you're going to get paid. And so if you're a big mining organization, you go, well, okay, I'm going to take all the variance out of this operation. So I can sit here at the beginning of the month. Let's say you're an organization, you have 8 exahashes, okay, which it takes a lot to operate. There's a lot of infrastructure you got to run. I do understand that. And so they could sit there at the beginning of the month and go, well, I know where the network difficulty level is. I know where fees are. I know approximately what the Bitcoin price is. I can predict my revenue for the month right at the beginning of the month, right? So I just take all the risk out. And that's what FPPS does. Now, what has to happen is on the other side is it shifts the risk profile to the pool, which has to have a bunch of money sitting in reserve because they have to pay the hashers whether they win the blocks or not. Yeah. But on the other hand, if they have a good month, fees are high, they win a lot of blocks, they do really, really well. And there's a cost of that. You could think of it as insurance. You could think of it as an insurance product too. And so, what we've proven, I've done it in studies in my own company, is that the payout method of Ocean, which is, hey, you only get paid when you win a block. We call the system tides. You get paid when they win a block, results in more money to the bottom line. There's variance, although that variance is getting lower because of the hash rate getting bigger, but you get more money, and it's because Ocean doesn't have to insure anything. In fact, Ocean, even better, Ocean never holds any of the money.
Because it goes directly from the Coinbase to the wallet of the miner that found the block.
Yeah. And I do want to say, I mean, that there is a limit to that. So it's kind of, if you're a commercial operation, you're going to get that. If you're tiny and you're only getting 200 sats a month, well, you might get it that way, but it'll take a long time. Like, it has to build to a certain threshold, or you can create lightning payouts through Bolt 12. Granted, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do still for people. So you got to be a little more advanced user to get to that.
Bob, I had a question, but I think you kind of sort of answered it with this last section, which was kind of, how come we had this big transition in the last decade of miners turning into hashers? Kind of, why do they not run their own nodes? I would think, if you have a big operation, like $1 million warehouse, why are you not running, your own nodes, creating your own templates? But then I guess, is the main reason the FPPS model, they kind of just want to outsource the kind of their hash to a pool and just have, steady kind of revenue stream expectations, so they minimize risk? Is that one of the main reasons, or there's other reasons why kind of we saw the shift of miners turn into hashers?
Okay, so I'm not in the boardrooms, so I can only speculate. So I want to preface that
personal
by saying
opinion, non-facts.
Yeah. So that is one. Second reason is plausible deniability. So if a transaction gets included in a given block, and let's say that transaction is tied to North Korea paying Iran for some uranium, an example. Well, the hashing organization now has plausible deniability to say, well, go talk to the pool. I didn't have anything to do with it. They just borrowed my hash rate. They rented my hash rate to do that. So it's their problem. Go talk to them.
I see.
So that's an extreme example, but that plausible deniability of not.
It's like responsibility dodging, kind of, right? You're not kind of responsible for what goes through.
And I came out of that world. I can understand why if I was the head legal counsel or CFO of one of those companies, I go, well, we don't want this risk, whether it's for legal ramifications or for, shareholder issues or, like those sort of things. Like you don't want to ruffle feathers, right? I think at the end of the day, what really happens is I had a choice myself. If you go back, we talked briefly about the China mining ban. So something happened in the history of Bitcoin that I think is glossed over a little bit. So when the China mining ban occurred, roughly June of 2021, it set off a series of events. Overnight, there were almost no public miners at that point. What happened was those of us that were in the business had a field day. Because suddenly overnight our revenues doubled.
Because the miners switched off in China, right? So everything went over to your side.
There's half the hash rate. Those of us left got twice as much money. Like it's just simple math, right? We're wildly profitable. In addition, it was a pretty good period for Bitcoin price as well. Lots of capital wanted to come in to the markets. Several of the organizations, the ones that you would now know, Riot, Marathon, Core Scientific, like these companies, especially coming from being led by folks who were coming out of finance, coming out of Wall Street. My perception is, again, I'm going to say that, my perception is they all went, oh my God, perfect time to IPO, right? Let's take advantage. We will raise a shitload of money. Additionally, we had the unfortunate situation of the SPAC vehicle. Are you familiar with that? So it's called a Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation. So this is a bit of a tangent, but I hope you can cut me off. If I'm boring you or anybody else,
not
just
at all.
cut me off.
Not at all.
Thick.
We're here to learn, so take it away, Bob.
So I was part of taking a company public in the early 90s. Gateway. Okay. We eventually became a Fortune 200 company, 10 billion in revenue, 25,000 employees. And so we, by a lot of measures, very, very successful. We made the decision in, I believe it was 91, that we were going to go public. But we spent 2 years. We went public in 93. Spent almost 2 years getting the company ready to go public. Internal processes, financial systems, manufacturing reporting, corporate treasury strategies, all this sort of stuff. Training of personnel, all this sort of stuff. Took 2 years to get the organization ready. And we went and we were largely ready, for this. And the next decade was a marvelous ride as a result. The world has changed though. So most companies going public today, and I hate this, use what's called the Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation. So the idea is this. There are groups of people out there. They go create a corporation that essentially does nothing. They have a tiny bit of revenue, consulting, a tiny retail business, whatever. Okay, but they go through the whole process of going public, even though they really, excuse me?
Through that company which they just created.
You create this company and you go, and it may not be on NASDAQ or a big board, it's on an over-the-counter exchange, but you go through all the process with the SEC in the US and you get registered and you have all this, okay? Then what you do is you make it known that you are open to acquisition. So a private company, let's say a Bitcoin mining company in September that suddenly finds itself in a really great position. They've got a balance sheet or a P&L statement that's looking good. They want to get in the market quickly. Instead of doing what Gateway did, which is go spend a year or so getting your company ready,
they just acquired that brand new company.
You acquire that company. It's like a reverse merger. You pay off the old company and then boom, you're the king, right?
How is this legal, Bob?
Yeah, great question. I think it's terrible, but it's and essentially all of the Bitcoin mining companies, what they call mining, we're really hashing, right? They all went public through this vehicle, and what you saw was IPOs that did well and then ran smack into the bear market right after. And they were on the whole, I'm not going to say everyone and every person, they were on the whole led by organizations that had no experience in public companies. They did not bring in the people to help them know how to run a public company, and they were ill prepared to do it. And we had massive flameouts like Core Scientific. Core Scientific is one of the worst company blowups in the history of companies. It should be considered, in my opinion, this is Bob Burnett's opinion, it should be considered by the Bitcoin community a pariah on the same scale as FTX or Celsius. Like the damage they did. So a short version of that story. Through the SPAC vehicle, they went public in January of 2022. They were bankrupt by November of 22. They needed 11 months before they were bankrupt. In that time period, they grew their debt to over $1 billion. They had a big stash of Bitcoin. I forgot off the top of my head how big it was. They had thousands and thousands of Bitcoin. It may have been like 10,000 Bitcoin or something on that order that they had in treasury at the time they went public. And they burnt through all of it. And so when you look at the bear market that ensued, they are front and center responsible with FTX and Celsius for what happened and the length of the bear market. And the damage they did to the mining companies was massive too, because what they did is, remember I told you they had $1 billion in debt. What did they do with the $1 billion? Well, first of all, a whole bunch of the money was money they borrowed from BlockFi, and they forced BlockFi's bankruptcy. They were a big part of why BlockFi went bankrupt, and that whole part of the ecosystem failed. Now, BlockFi is somewhat responsible too, but they were a catalyst to that. They took almost all that money and they bought a ton of mining equipment, tens of thousands of servers from Bitmain primarily.
The peak of the bull market when they're like at a super premium, right?
Well, they were the reason it got so expensive.
Okay.
Because they bought so much, there was none available. So that's why they got so expensive. Now, here's what's amazing. They didn't know where they were going to plug them in. They had no home for them. So they took loans at double-digit interest rates from people like BlockFi on equipment that they were overpaying for, and then they were doing so to lock out and prevent other mining companies like mine from being able to get access to machines in this period when we were trying to grow. And to a lesser degree, some of the other companies participated, but Core Scientific was terrible. Absolutely awful. And then when this thing started to unravel in the summer of 2022, when they have to start making interest payments. They were betting on Bitcoin being 100,000 and it was at 18. Well, now they had to start selling their Bitcoin stash to pay their bills. Well, they were selling everything they were mining and selling their stash. Well, what did that do? That made the price lower, and that made them sell more of their stash. So they finally ran out of gas in November of that year because they were bankrupt. But you wonder, why was the price of Bitcoin suppressed through all that period from in 2022? Well, you can thank Core Scientific for a whole bunch of that. I was not happy when they kind of reemerged from bankruptcy. I don't want people that were investors to not recover some of their investment, although I don't think they got much back. But I was not happy to see them reemerge. I think that it would have been best to let that dog die and let something else reemerge from the ashes. But I go through all this because I don't think people understand the dynamics that are going on. I think those that own stocks in public mining companies absolutely have the right to do so, but I don't think they think through what they are supporting. So if you're a Bitcoiner, you care about the ethos of Bitcoin, then I think you should ask yourself whether or not the behavior of those companies is consistent with your belief system. If they are, God bless you, go for it. I hope you make money. But are they or not? Now, I will say, because I probably sound really clear, I will say Marathon is a real mining company. So they actually do the things we talked about. I can call them a miner because they run a node, they create templates. They create templates I don't like, by the way, but I'll go back to what I said to you earlier. I will fight to the death for their right to exist and manage that the way they are, because they are doing it right, in my opinion. And so and they get to vote with their hash rate and their templates the way they think the world should be, and they think the world should include inscriptions and things like that. Like I said, I hate that, but I love their right to do it more. So
Wow.
So anyway, that was like a million miles away from probably where you wanted to be. I'm sorry.
No, but it wasn't. It actually made, like, I got a lot of questions, in my time, like, why was the 2020 like bear market so long? And I never had really an answer to it. And to a certain extent, I never really put in the thought or the research to realize it. But you taking us on that journey, and just what Core Scientific did. I mean, they should be called Core Bearific, not scientific. Like, they annihilated and the worst part was not annihilated themselves, but fair players such as yourself were kind of unable to scale up your operations because of their own greed, and not just greed, but kind of unexperienced, reckless behavior, which just ruined the party for everyone. So no,
yeah. Greed is valid too, though. I think
yeah, true.
That, but
buying stock to be holding them in warehouses, not knowing where to plug it, I think that falls under greed for sure. So no, thank you so much, Bob, for sharing that with me, and I'm sure the listeners definitely enjoyed that, and I'm sure that was the first ever they heard of kind of those proceedings of what happened. I'm thinking now, where do we want to circle? Do you want to touch upon any of the points? Do you want to go down further, any of the things that we've covered so far? Because we've covered a lot of things. What do you feel like, Bob? Or do you want me to round that up? I usually close off the episodes, but do you want to touch upon anything else?
I don't have anything, but I'm happy to go where, like I said, I told you at the beginning, you're the driver.
I'm the captain of the ship.
You're the captain of the ship. You want me to go deeper? I will.
No, of course. And I also want to be respectful of your time. I know we're going a little bit over the allocated time, so I'm respectful of that. But I'll close it up. Usually I close up with my guests. I ask them to give one piece of advice for someone starting their Bitcoin journey. I'm going to switch that around because in your case, you are the expert in Bitcoin mining. So I'll reframe it to, what advice would you give to someone looking to get into mining today, and specifically focus on the rabbit? So not just, of course, getting a BitAxe is a great starting point to learn how to hash, to kind of tweak the things up. But let's say, and maybe that's a selfish question, I'm considering living in Russia with cheap electricity, setting up, some ASICs in the countryside at my grandparents-in-law. What would be your advice for me and other people that are listening to this episode that kind of want to take it to the next step from the BitAxe and kind of want to mine and create their own templates today in 2025?
First, you have to decide why you want to do it. Do you want to do it to make money, specifically, create and increase your Bitcoin stack? Or do you want to do it because you want to support the network and you want to understand it better?
Can you be in both? Can you have shoes in both boats?
Sure.
To be stacking Bitcoin, not to sell it off at the end of the month, to hold, and holding virgin Bitcoin, I think would be the most kind of, and supporting the network as well, but having a cold storage with virgin Bitcoin, that would be something special.
Oh, it absolutely is. And, I can tell you that privately as a miner, we get approached by usually individuals who wish to own virgin Bitcoin. So, and they will pay a small premium over market price for it. So, I happen to run one of the few organizations in the world where such a thing can be purchased right now.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah, because only participation, only with Ocean and solo miners. It's the only place in the world you can buy virgin Bitcoin. So, we get approached and people will pay extra if we want to sell. We've only done it a couple times, honestly, but I get approached by it. And, why do people want that? Because they want Bitcoin with no history. That's the beauty of When you get a Coinbase transaction, it has no history. So as you said, it's virgin Bitcoin. You can do both. I would say I do both. I mean, that is the essence of Barefoot Mining, is a company that does both. But if if your primary impetus is participation and knowledge and that, you can do things at a small scale with a BitX. As you get more advanced, you may say, hey, I want to buy one of these like home heating solutions. There's some really cool stuff being done in those things. You can kind of go that route. It's not your business. You're not going to make a massive amount of money, but you're participating, you're learning, you're one of the rabbits that
curious.
They're never going to be able to hunt, right? So that's one. If you decide that you want to do it at a bigger scale, you want to make a business out of it, essentially, start with energy. You have to find an advantageous energy situation. If you can produce your own energy, I'm speaking globally now, especially, like if you can produce your own energy, you're better off. You may be in a very blessed situation where you can get access to some on-grid stuff cheaply and quickly. And that's probably ideal as a starting point, by the way. Like if you can find that on grid, because learning how to produce energy is a whole nother skill set.
Another science, I was going to say, like, let alone getting the mining right, but then creating your own energy is like levels above.
So learn how to be a miner, and it starts kind of in phases, because learn how to operate the equipment, learn how to do basic repairs on the equipment, learn how to configure it, do it with a handful of units that you can manage. Then maybe go to a few dozen units. Now learn how to use management software like a Foreman or Brains or there's some different solutions out there. But learn how to manage things at a little bigger scale, where you learn how to use those kind of tools. And you also start learning some things about big power. Like, it's not stuff to mess around with. Each unit consumes, your average unit's going to consume about 3.2 kilowatts. And so you string together a few dozen of those, and now you're at maybe 100 kilowatts. That's serious power. And, make sure that you've got help on the electrical side. If you're not a master electrician yourself, get somebody involved that does that, because you screw up, you die. And I don't mean that to scare people away. I just want you to know, like, it can be done right. It's not that hard to do it right, but you better damn well do it right, because people can die, right? And the bigger you get, you start talking about a megawatt or a couple megawatts, you're in some serious territory. Learn about heat mitigation. Like how do you get rid of the heat, not just of one unit, but of a bunch of units, and how they interact with each other. Like that's kind of the learning curve. When you get through that stuff, now if you want to go from a couple dozen to a couple hundred, now we're start talking, megawatts instead of kilowatts. That's another thing. But you'll do it in stages and see whether or not you want to continue on. I think jumping to this big stage, if you're super technically competent, maybe you can do that. But I just think for the average person, you want to go in steps.
For sure. You definitely don't want to jump too far. Well, we just had the story with Core Scientific when they bit off too much that they could chew, and essentially they blew themselves up. But in the sense of, my question would be also hardware, right? So there's not too many choices at the moment. It's mainly like Bitmain and what's the other one?
MicroBT,
What's miners? That's correct. I also heard in Spaces you are developing your own chips, right? And you will be creating ASICs at some point. What would you, so kind of, that might be some competitive conversation here, but is there any advice you can give on the equipment, or that doesn't really matter? It's all about how you manage it and kind of the setup you have.
There are those vendors. There are a couple others coming up. Aerodyne, for instance.
Okay.
Canon. Their Avalon series. This is a few other choices today. That's at the system level. I want to be clear. I'm working on a chip.
Okay.
So this is kind of one of those, we talked about the difference between hashers and miners, and I think ASIC is another term that's misunderstood. So ASIC stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit.
Mm-hmm.
It is a chip, not a system.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoiners have, in my mind, an annoying tendency to refer to the system as an ASIC, and that's improper.
That was me, by the way. I'll be honest. I thought ASIC was the actual machine. So that's another thing I learned today.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's partly why I go on these shows, but it's kind of like in a PC, personal computer, you have Intel or AMD make the processor, okay, and Dell or Gateway back in the day or whatever, IBM, whatever, made the computer, right? And so trying to distinguish between those two things, because right now what's I think the reason people have kind of fallen into this is that Bitmain and MicroBT do both today. They create the silicon. It's their design of the silicon and their design of the machine.
Just like
Apple,
Apple right now, since they have their own M1, these M chips, right? They create, they don't have Intel chips anymore. It's their own. So it's the same analogy, right? With the ASIC.
But as you know, I mean, they historically either used RISC processors from Intel, or at one point they were using the same x86 architecture stuff. Then they went to RISC. Before Intel, I can't remember who did some of the early processors. But anyway, I think Bitcoin is on a path where there needs to be a separation of the two. That, put it this way, Apple's a pretty unique beast as a company. It's pretty difficult to be a great silicon company and a great systems company. They don't go together. And I will say this, right now, in my opinion, the ASIC, meaning the chip done by MicroBT and especially Bitmain, is not terrible. I think it can be done much better. I'm working on a company to try to beat them at that game. But on the system side, I think they're pretty poor. And they're even worse in running a system company, meaning technical support, parts replacement, warranty repair, like these sort of things. They're really bad at that. Which is part of, by the way, if you get into this business, you better learn how to do some of the stuff yourself.
That was one of the tips you were given. And what I heard from my research, kind of sending your machine off, you wait for like a year if you're lucky to get it back. And if it's fixed.
Do that. Right. Yeah. You need to learn to fix it yourself. And it stinks because they should be standing behind it. But, just got to know going in that that's part of it. So anyway, I think if we are able to create a world where the silicon is separated from the system makers and give companies in the world who are very good at making systems already, and there's several of them, the opportunity to come into the market. They'll do it in the right way with these other pieces that are better. But Bitmain's got a kind of a monopoly right now. I mean, nobody knows for sure, but let's say they're on the low side, 80% probably of the market today. So yeah.
Wow. Well, that was,
where are we going with it?
I think that was the longest part of the longest advice a guest has ever given. But I think that was a very specific and niche advice. And actually, as I mentioned, it was a little bit of a selfish question as well, because that's something I've been kind of considering. How should I do it? What should I do it? And I said, well, hey, if we're going to have Bob Burnett on the pod, I might as well slide that in the end to get some info. And for sure, there must be other listeners that are also considering of dipping their feet into actual, stepping up from a BitX, talking about chips, right? Just to share to the listeners that are first time, or maybe not first time, but hearing more about the BitX. The BitX, if I'm not mistaken, Bob, has one of the chips from an S19 ASIC, right? From Bitmain. Is that correct?
Yeah. And God bless Scott 9000 if you follow him on Twitter. He's a buddy. I just saw him last week at a conference in Miami. They're doing great work. There are other companies doing great work as well, both in like home heaters. I like the Avalon series. Brains is doing a little mini miner.
Yeah, I saw it. BTC Prague last year. It was premiered, which is really nifty.
All great stuff. Yeah. So And by the way, I'm planning to be at Prague again this year too myself. So hopefully for
I'll
those
see
of
you there in person as well. That's the first conference where I'll be also speaking. So I guess we'll spend some time there. So I'm definitely looking forward to Prague, which actually to some listeners, definitely get your tickets for Prague. Cause that's an event last year I attended my first one. I wasn't there for the initial one in 2023, but I don't know how it was for you, Bob. To me, it was my favorite Bitcoin conference ever. And I think I'm going to make it into a regular routine every summer, go down to Prague to reconnect, something really special.
Yeah, it's a great conference. Tejas and Martin are great guys. And I spoke both at the 2023 and 2024. I'll be there again. I'm pretty sure that they'll want me to speak again. And really great gathering of people. Certainly my favorite conference outside the US. But yeah, definitely a rival for my favorite anywhere and may well be. And I was answering a question though, and I forgot what it was.
We're talking about the ASIC, so about Scott 9000 with the ASIC chip on the BitX.
Yeah. So here's what. So let's just say hypothetically, I wanted to build a personal computer right now. What's great about that is I can call Intel up. I still have some contacts there. I can say, hey, I'm thinking of getting back on the business. Send me the data books and some samples of whatever the latest processor is, right? An i9 this or a whatever they have, right? And I'm literally going to get a book. It's going to be like, it's going to be like a book, like this big, and probably not a hardcover, but I'll get a data book and it's going to tell me everything about that chip, everything about it. I'll have a technical support representative so that as I'm building prototypes and something doesn't work right or I don't understand something, I can call them and they'll help me figure it out. Okay, they're fantastic at it. In our world, nobody will sell you a chip directly right now. So what the folks doing the bid axes and these other products have to do,
buy old machines, right?
They buy old machines. They have to desolder the chip from the old machine. They have to figure out what the hell each pin on the chip does. What timing, what voltage, what is the function of each of those things? If Bitmain changes something on the chip, there's no notification that, oh, hey, anything that you get that was produced after April 1st of 2025, now this is different. No, they have to figure it out. I'm not saying Bitmain is in the wrong for this. It's their chip. They have the right to not publish these things. But it's primarily the only way for these folks to get involved. Now, some of you might know this, but Intel briefly entered the market and they had a product and some of that silicon is available. And so there are some efforts to use those chips to build these kind of products where you can get the right support, but there's a limited supply. I forgot how many there were. I don't know, several 100,000. I think Jack Dorsey and Block, I think bought most of them and then donated some of them so developers can get access to them. But that's what we need. We can't innovate. These guys, like I said, God bless them. I love what they're doing. They've had to spend the majority of their time figuring out what the hell the chip does. Instead of figuring out how to make the device better, they're figuring out how to do the chip, and they have to keep up with it because as different versions of the S19 come out and then the S21 and then the T21, etc., they're different. And they have to redo this thing over and over and over again. It's just laborious. It's very inefficient. So hopefully these solutions will come. Hopefully my company will make it. It's hard, by the way. I mentioned briefly my effort, which is called M5ers. We've been working at it for a year and a half. We still have 9 months or so, maybe 12 to get to market. We have a lot of hurdles to get through. The biggest being we need a bunch of money. That it's a process that the closer and closer you get to production, you're on an exponential growth in the amount of capital you need. Ultimately, you need tens of millions of dollars
for the R&D and test production and everything, right?
Yeah, and to buy wafer starts and to like it gets really, really expensive. So, and there's a lot of chicken and egg where people that potentially are investors or lenders want to know that you have customers, and customers want to know that you have enough money to get to the finish line, so they would put the effort into designing around your chip. It's another one of these like, well,
that sounds like what you've been experiencing with Ocean for the past year and a half as well, getting these bigger miners to basically to push their hash power onto the Ocean pool, because like you're not big enough, but like, and it's the same story with this one, right? Like the investors need the customers and the customers.
Yeah, I've spent 40 years now in this world, and
it doesn't get
the same sort of thing, you know. It doesn't get easier, you know. The world of developing technology and sitting at kind of the leading edge, it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, there's a lot of stress. There are a lot of failures. You know, failure is not a bad thing. I think that, you know, that certain personality types probably are not prone to this, because you probably will actually fail in more of these endeavors than you succeed. And I think that's, you have to have the certain type of personality that doesn't get defeated. You know, I've heard Elon Musk talk about these sort of things before. Like he embodies this spirit. And I'm not saying I am Elon Musk or even remotely close to him, but I think I come from the same mindset. And I think Steve Jobs was that kind of person. And I think I'm, you know, a compatriot of those kind of guys in what I do. And my wife would tell you I'm involved in way too many things, from, you know, the mining operations. I have the mining pool. I have a mining ASIC. We're doing a derivative product. We didn't even talk about block space and any of those sort of things.
We're definitely going to have you back on to discuss what you're actually on. What other things are under the belt? But how do you manage to do all of those things, Bob? Like, I mean, how do you manage your time and balance between like work and family time? Is that a challenge as well?
Well, I'm 60 now. My kids are all grown. That helps.
Okay.
I have 5 grandkids and 2 on the way, though. You know, my wife, I have a very supportive wife who's you know, believed in me and supported me, but also is a very independent, accomplished person in and of herself. So, you know, she's got her own shit and she's very successful at it. So she's not waiting for me. Like if I'm busy, like I've been all day today, I mean, she's been doing her thing. She's not waiting around for me by any means. It's hard though. You know, I'm human, so there are periods in which I get tired or burnt out a little bit, and I need to refresh a little. That, you know, that happens. And sometimes we fail or we run into these things. You have to fight through that emotionally and still get out of bed and go after the things that are still alive. Like, you know, that's just kind of part of this. But, you know, it helps tremendously that in my career, most of the things I've worked on, I believe, are things that are world changing. I'm not saying that I am the driver of any of them, but I was fortunate to work first in the personal computer industry when it was tiny and
in its infancy.
And so it was easy to get excited and motivated because I knew that we were changing the world, and we did, you know, and I can look back on that proudly. And while there were little failures within there, holistically, it was extremely successful, and I'm very proud of my participation. And I think Bitcoin is similar, you know, even if I fail, because I haven't fallen flat on my face yet in Bitcoin, but I probably will at some point.
Hopefully not. Touch wood.
Not work out, but something will probably fail. But I think that's part of it going in, like, too, you know, if if when I say you, I don't mean you, GG,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean all of us, we'll go in and attempt things in life and expect that you're not going to make it every time. Not everything is going to succeed. If don't confuse that with don't go for it. Like you
Just
still
lower
go
your
for it. You work.
expectations. Don't think you're going to win every time.
Well, just because there are so many factors, many of which you don't control, right? And so, be prepared to fail. I guess that's the whole thing. And if you do fail, make sure that go into it knowing that if you fail, it's okay. If you can't accept that, then I would say probably don't go for it, because if you can't handle that emotionally, if you're not going to be able to pick yourself up and go for the next thing, then you probably shouldn't go for it, right? But we need people to go for it. Bitcoin needs that, and hopefully there's a lot of people out there, and whether that's doing a podcast or starting a mining company or building an ASIC or whatever the hell,
Making code. A lot of fast developers out there.
Yeah, and know yourself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Don't fool yourself. Don't go public if you're not ready to go public. Like those sort of things.
That was a great lesson from the mining companies that we shared. Amazing. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time on. I don't want to take any more of your time. I think we're going into record time, over 2 hours. Usually it's like an hour and a half, but I didn't even realize how this time passed, because you really took us on a journey, and the insights you shared. And I mean, Bitcoin mining, it's such a diverse topic, and there's still a lot of things that we didn't touch upon. Most of my points that I had prepared weren't even touched upon. We went fully down the conversation route, but that's how I like to take it. But we'll definitely love to have you back on the show sometime in the future. I know you have a lot of things going on. I'm also bringing in a new format where I want to start having round table discussions with multiple guests on particular topics. Of course, mining will definitely be one of them. So you will be definitely invited to one of those, and we'll see. Maybe we'll get Scott 9000. Maybe, to focus more on the rabbit scene, I think is more important, and the horses than the elephants. Those guys are doing their own business. But where can we send our audience, Bob, that want to follow you and all the incredible work that you're doing? What's the best place?
Barefootmining.com if you want to learn about wild horse mining and what we do, especially if you're an investor looking that you'd like to participate. We're always happy to talk to folks. I'm active on Twitter, boomer_BTC. And I have, if whatever 2+ hours of me ranting wasn't enough, Old Man Yells is a show I do on YouTube. I put out a show every month or so. They're just monologues, just me.
Nice.
Ranting on a topic. There is one on Core Scientific, by the way. If you go back a little ways, you can get a half-hour spiel with some more detail there if that interests you.
Amazing. We'll definitely include all of those links in the show notes. And yeah, once again, Bob, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. It's really empowering and motivating, to hear these stories and the minds that are creating this brave new world that we are all building together. And I look very much forward to seeing you just, I guess, in a couple, 2-3 months, where Prague is just around the corner. So I definitely look forward to seeing you in person.
Prague.
For sure.
Thank you, Gigi.
Thank you so much, Bob. All the best. Have a great rest of the day, and speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might benefit too. Your support keeps us going, and we appreciate it. See you in the next one.